Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. Federal funding has been used in a variety of ways on a state and regional level to push critical race theory and controversial sex education in schools. Joining me today is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. So Brendan, you wrote about one of these regional technical assistance centers that's receiving federal funding. But before we get into what they're doing, can you just kind of explain what they are and where this funding is coming from?
Yeah, Eliana, I can try. With a lot of the stuff that's in the federal government, you start getting into like a maze of like grants and grantees and competitive bids and a deluge of like information on like federally funded sorts of programs, and then there are like sub grantees, and so like it starts to get sort of difficult to track down exactly where this is coming from. But this is part of the Equity Assistance Centers program, also known as the Training and Advisory Services, and it's from the Department of Education's Elementary and Secondary Education Office. And basically, the short story is that these are like a holdover from the 1960s, where there was a desegregation in schools, and then these are the desegregation centers that were born out of that. So there is a indefinite funding that will keep going to these. So every year there is, I think it's $6.575 million, and I can double check that here, that goes towards these equity assistance centers, right? And these offer technical assistance to school districts. So basically, if you have a problem, you can go to them and they can try to help you figure it out, right? And that's sort of their point is, and I think that comes back from that they were originally referred to the desegregation assistance centers, authorized under the Title IV of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. So it's like they're supposed to help play a role in ensuring students have equitable access to learning opportunities, regardless of race, sex, national origin, or religion, anything like that.
So the one that your story focuses on is the Midwest Plains Equity Assistance Center, and they've been providing a variety of resources to schools on like critical race theory and sex education. Could you get into the sorts of resources that they're providing?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I found, and I think the hard part about this is sort of focusing on a couple of different things, because there's a large body of work in terms of resources and stuff that they have. But some of them that I found that maybe illustrate some of the author's ideological perspective, or maybe what it's trying to do. Where one of them was like an August 2023 zine, it's called. It's like a short form of magazine that is more self-published usually. And it basically was on the fight for social justice and special education. And the authors of that said, and this was based on like a vodcast, I think, that was put on by the MAP Center. And then that's the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center. So that's one of these four regional technical assistance centers funded by the Department of Education's, grant. So they created a zine based on what they were talking about. And they said that the grounding framework for the magazine is DISCRIT, which is a combination of critical race theory and disability studies. And that it, is based on these voices and experience about disability and race in Waterloo, Iowa. That's been controversial, and that's kind of something that we've written a lot about at Chalkboard News, is that, there's been a number of states that have banned critical race theory. There's, Republicans and conservatives have raised concerns that, this is divisive, or it pits students against each other, or can, have students feeling guilty. And so it's that kind of thing. And basically the framework as described in the zine is that white supremacist ideology has shaped the medical and academic belief that Black people as a whole are mentally inferior and underdeveloped. This belief trickles into classrooms and institutional settings. That's like in the zine. And that sort of echoes some of this bills that we've seen in Republican states, specifically Republican states saying, these are divisive topics, right? So there's been that prohibition there, and of people saying, like assuming that people are inherently racist or that these institutions are inherently racist is not a good starting point. So that, kind of goes up into conflict. So there are people who are very, up in arms about critical race theory and kind of all of its iterations.
And they've also provided a variety of resources encouraging some controversial views on sex education. What's sort of the perspective that they take on that?
Yeah, so they say that school-based sex education should basically, one of the things that they said in a different resource was that upholding gender stereotypes is a bad idea, that it's detrimental to society and progress. So this is something that is in a resource published by the center, taking a position on, sort of what is taught in schools about sex ed, and they advocate for comprehensive sex ed as opposed to abstinence-based sex ed, which is controversial in a number of different states as well. So that's like been another like debated sort of topic is sex ed, and local and state. And a lot of federal money goes toward abstinence-only programs as well. So that's kind of built into some of the laws there. But essentially, too, that resource also said that it's more important that students have access to comprehensive sex ed than the parents' rights to opt out of that. And so they basically said we should prioritize teaching this to students regardless of what parents say or whatever concerns parents have, because it's more important to give kids sex ed that has these kinds of basics in it or is not abstinence only than it is to uphold parental rights. And so again, like that's kind of a controversial topic, right? I've written a lot about parental rights and sort of the argument and the pushback against that. And so this is sort of just saying we're not going to worry about parental rights.
And another story that you wrote that also kind of touches on some similar ideas of kind of federal funding through different grant programs and being used for some controversial kind of equity perspectives. You wrote this other one about a equity event put on by the Wisconsin Department of Education. Can you tell us more about this event that they put on?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complicated sort of state network. It's like from the Department of Public Instruction, but it's its own thing called the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's Educational Equity Network. So that's sort of the technical name. They also just call it the network. It also has a series called the Network's Education Equity Leadership Institute. So again, like we have like a lot of different names going on, but essentially it's called the Network or the Equity Network, and then the Education Equity Leadership Institute. And it's funded with special education funds. So that's sort of the interesting thing about it, is that it acknowledges that this is created with the IDEA Act funds. So that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which was passed in 1990. And that basically guarantees students with disabilities a fair and appropriate public education. And the states, from what I can tell, I think that the argument is, we have disproportionate impacts from special ed. Like there are more students of color who are in special education programs. So this would help to reduce that disparity. But these institutes, these leadership institutes, they don't really have like a clear tie-in to that fair and appropriate public education aspect. And so I think it raises questions about like, is this in line with the program of the federal funds? And I didn't got no response back from the state Department of Education about this. They were not willing to clarify, like, how is this in the mission of the IDEA Act? And so I think that basically these institutes are about race and have some of those kinds of like critical race theory components potentially, or like we have, with authors who are sort of notably maybe controversial because of what they're saying in terms of critical race theory or intersectionality, and some of these different kinds of things that have been targeted by Republican states or by Republican lawmakers or people who have been, vocal against these sort of ideas. And so they're being invited in and speaking to teachers about these kinds of things. And in one case, a presenter in the March Institute just most recently said, it's important that teachers are activists. And like what I'm trying to do here is inspire a spirit of activism. And, you have to be working for equity, and sort of going against the grain and against the mold. And if not, you're not doing anything. You're part of the problem, essentially. So it's sort of like these kinds of ideas are put in there, and they're being paid for with federal funds. So people could reasonably disagree with that, I think.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.
Are you tired of news that puts politics over people? At the nonprofit Franklin News Foundation, we believe in putting people over politics by delivering nonpartisan news and audio content that serves you, the American taxpayer. With Franklin News Foundation, you can read fact-based, state-focused news for free at thecentersquare.com. You can listen to civil, balanced conversations between policy experts through our podcast network at americastalking.com. Or you can get in-depth news on K-12 education spending, curriculum, and school safety at chalkboardnews.com. It's all free through Franklin, where we put you, the American taxpayer, first in every story, episode, and conversation. And it's only possible through our supporters. Together, we can produce content that puts people over politics and brings Americans the news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate. Once again, that's franklinnews.org/donate.